Ladies, would you be willing to submit to a man like that? Every woman that I've ever talked to said, absolutely. Okay, yes, thank you so much for the applause. Thank you, because you're right. You're right. There's not a woman in the world that wouldn't go, of course I would, because that's the partnership that is God blessed. So, let's see, I think we've got here. So I want to walk through. Men, like I said, you're on the hot seat today. You're on the hot seat because we want to go through some biblical principles. So I want to take that very first verse. And guys, we're Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25. I'm just going to read that one verse. Husbands, love your wife just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. All right, I want to take each one of those phrases. Gentlemen, you are to love your wife. And remember, why am I starting with you? It doesn't mean that I'm not going to get to your wives. We're going to start with them tomorrow morning. But it's you today. And the reason I'm starting with you is because God has appointed you as leader in the family. So it's your responsibility first. So gentlemen, you are to love your wives. Now, we've all taught, if you're pastors, you've taught that there's 4 Greek words for love. There's eros, which is sexual, physical love. There is storge, which is a brotherly, a family love. There's phileo, which is a friendship type of love. And then there's agape. And God has not said that you're to any one of these other 3. He didn't require. Now you can be friends with your wife, of course. And you'll have wonderful, passionate, sexual love. That's wonderful. That's all part of a marriage. But he doesn't call you to do anything. He calls you to agape love, which is a selfless love. It is a love, understand, and here's where we always, as humans, but especially as men, we want to love somebody who is lovable. In other words, well, she's got to earn it. She's got to earn your love. That's not what God calls us to do. He says you're at agape love. Agape is not an emotional response to what she does for you. Agape love is a choice. And it's not dependent on what your wife does or who she is. You choose to love her. Going back to that other question about what happens if my wife is unsaved. God says you're to love her. That's it. God says you are to love your wife. You are to choose to love her whether she deserves it or not. And this is why God's kingdom is so upside down, so different than the world, is because God comes along and says, oh yeah, this is how things work. The world doesn't know what it's doing. All right, so if I could summarize it, to agape love your wife, husbands, you can write this down. Oh no, you don't have to write it down. It's right there in your notes. You are to continually practice self-denial for the sake of your wives. That's agape love. That's what Christ. You see, God modeled it for us. He agape loved us when we were unlovable, when we were sinful and disgusting and we hated him and we would have spit on him. And if you and I were at that cross, we would have pounded the nails into Christ's hands ourselves. And God still loved us. Men, no matter what, you are to love your wives that way. All right. Okay. Yeah. In fact, let's go to the next phrase. Just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. Okay. As Christ loved the church, it's incredible. Listen to this. Christ loved the church so much, like I was just talking about. He came and died for you when you didn't deserve it. When you were a jerk, when you were just the worst, he came and died for you. And he gave himself. He gave up his life. He gave up everything. He gave up the kingdom, the throne, the ruler of the universe. He gave that up and came down to save you. Ooh. This is getting tougher and tougher, isn't it, guys? Yeah. Because, I mean, there are times when it is tough to love our wives. I know it. I know it. I know. My wife would agree with you. My wife would, oh my goodness. That doesn't matter. God has called you to do it anyway. Next phrase. You're to love her as your own body. Understand, this phrase is not, to treat her like you would treat your own body. No, no, no. The phrase is far more in depth, okay? That phrase means that we're to view her as part of our own body. No, 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 you're not to treat her as your own body. No, you're to view her as part, as Eve was taken out of Adam and was part of him. So when you give your life to your wife in marriage, you are to view her literally as part of your own skin. You're to view her as part. She is part of you. And so the result is, because a lot of husbands, they'll get mad at their wives, or they'll go, I was just talking to another guy the other day, and I go, so, I said, how you doing, brother? He goes, well, he says, the wife and I aren't doing too well. I said, why? He said, well, I haven't been home for 3 weeks. What? What do you mean you haven't been home for 3 weeks? He had literally separated himself from her physically and emotionally and psychologically just to get away from her. A perfect recipe for divorce. Okay, and God has said you can't do it. Okay, you can't go away from your own skin. You can't get rid of this. You can't take it off. And God is saying you're to view your wife in the exact same way. You cannot separate from her physically, emotionally, spiritually. She is one with you. That's what the marriage vow is all about. All right, next phrase. He who loves his wife loves himself. Why? Well, that's what the meaning. If she's part of your skin, then here's the incredible thing. When you do this sacrificial love, when you live out this type of life for her, when you practice self-denial for her and you give to her, you are actually giving to yourself. It's the most phenomenal miracle that God has set up. All right. So, well, I don't know if it's the most phenomenal, but it is a phenomenal miracle. All right. And then the next phrase is that you are to nourish, and understand that God wants us to view our wives. We are to pour into our wives. Because she is a part of us, we are to pour into her. Okay, so gentlemen, these are your responsibilities. This is how God has called you to live and to honor your wives. You are to love her as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her and sacrificed he sacrificed his own body, and then you are to view her as your own self, and you are to love her and nourish her. Wow. Okay, men, if I stopped right here and this was all that you heard of the full 2 days, and you went home and you determined that you were going to be this husband, you would revolutionize your marriage. Your wife would fall so madly in love with you. She would be so absolutely, yes, thank you ladies, she would be so absolutely in love with you that she would, your kids would go, wow, what happened to mommy and daddy? They would be just like, they would love it. Okay, so now, here's what happens though. Because we hear this, you're here at this seminar, you've heard this, you've seen it in the Word of God, but the world comes along and we hear this like once or twice or, maybe 3 times in a year. Every day when we go out in the world feeds us a lie. It's on the television, it's on the internet, it's in the magazines, it's in our newspapers, it's in the people that don't know Christ are talking about it in there. This is what they say. They say, you know what, gentlemen, don't listen to that advice. No, it's all about your headship and her submission. God comes along and says, gentlemen, because you agape love your wife, because you're following the example of Christ in Philippians chapter 2, no, it's not about your headship and her submission. It's about your humility as you seek to serve and honor your wife. The world comes along, and by the way, we're going to repeat these because this is so important. You could teach this once every 2 to 3 months in your church, just to bring people's focus in on the lies that the world keeps feeding them. But the world comes along and says, men, you know what you need to say? You need to say, I'm leader in the family, so you need to listen to what I got to say. God comes along and says, you got it all wrong. You need to say, yeah, I'm the leader in the family. God has given me that position. And because I am the leader, I am here to serve you. And men will say, well, wait. What do you mean? How can you say that a leader is supposed to serve? Well, you remember the Last Supper? You remember what Christ did for the disciples? What did he do? Yeah, he got down on his hands and knees with a bowl of water and their muddy feet from hiking, and he got down on his hands and knees at the Last Supper and scrubbed out their feet and when they said, Peter said, no, you can't do this. He said, no, I have to do this. In fact, all of you, listen up. Listen up. You need to do what I do. If you want to be the greatest, if you want to be the leader, then you must be the servant of all. God has called you to be the leader, men, and therefore you must serve. I know. A lot of you are here going, oh, I did not come to this seminar to hear this. I know it. I got it. A lot of us don't like what God says at first, but I'm telling you, this is the path to happiness and a dynamic marriage. All right, next thing. The world comes along and says, men, you need to look at your wife and say, you need to submit. Therefore, I'm going to tell you what to do. You need to cook my breakfast, and you need to do and you need to clean the house, and we give them a list of stuff to do. God comes along and says, yes, your wife is supposed to submit. Yes, you are the leader. But because she has to submit, I am holding you accountable. Oops. Vance, I am accountable for my wife. I am accountable for my children. And therefore, my attitude towards them, my love for them, my service of them is what God will hold me accountable for. Ooh. Okay, so let me just tell you, I wish the fleshly part of me wishes that this were the truth. Because I'm all about getting served. But you know what? As a